Hello, my name is Eskance, and I am here to talk to you of, I guess, deliver a lecture, intro to DDs. What we're going to be talking about here are the basics of destroyers, and first off, we can go through the stuff that apply to all the destroyers. Then we can start talking about the subtypes of destroyers. There are gunboats, there are torpboats. There's the glorious in between, which kind of spans a small variety of stuff. And then we're going to talk about basically how to win, how to make things happen. Well, introduction to DDs. Forgive me, I do ramble, so I might be a little all over the place. But usually if I can, get started at the start, it tends to just kind of flow from there. So first things first, let's go ahead and talk about upgrades on destroyers. There's not a ton of options here. So it's not going to be something that'll take forever, but it is something I have done with the carrier line, something I've done with the battleship line, and I would be remiss to not do it for destroyer. And rather than just give you, a list of, hey, just do this, that'll help you in the short term, but it doesn't help you in the long term. So the easiest way to do this is to go through all of it and just kind of explain the concept behind each of the upgrades, and if you should choose them or not. So in slot 1, we have 3 options. Main Armament Mod 1 gives more health to your turrets, gives more health to your torpedoes, reduces the risk they'll be incapacitated. Actually, pretty powerful on DDs. Turret health is standardized, so it's going to have a flat amount, and in general, you're not going to lose many turrets. But AA mounts and torpedoes, they have fluctuating health pools. This is done to simulate kind of a critical chance almost. As in, maybe a torpedo takes a devastating hit and just gets completely broken, whereas another torpedo gets hit in roughly the same area, but it's able to withstand it. For one ship, it's going to crack. Another ship, it's not. So in a way, it's representing like a critical strike, but we don't technically have that mechanic in the client. We just have an AoE-based damage delivery system. So having this module gives your torpedoes, which for destroyers, torpedoes, whether they're the main focus of the DD or not, they're a significant thing. So this module will give more health to those, make it a little less likely that they're going to break on you, and that's probably a solid choice, regardless of any situation you're in. Although, I think if you're in a druid, you don't have torps. Moving down, we have Auxiliary Armament Mod 1. I think there are a handful of destroyers that actually have secondaries, so not going to get a lot out of that. But as far as AA mount survivability, if you were in like a Holland or something, and you really you want it to be the ship that was going to block the enemy CV. You were going to play the front line and deny interesting aerial attacks or something. You might go into AA mount survivability, because as a destroyer, you're not going to have very many AA mounts, so a loss of even a single one is fairly significant, whereas on a cruiser or a battleship, a larger ship, you may lose AA mounts here and there, but it's almost insignificant to the whole unless it gets really severe. Usually that's going to be through shelling from a very large battleship, and it will be repeated shelling at that. Moving over to Magazine Mod 1. This is an option, not a highly recommended option for DDs, but it is an option. You can reduce the chance of your magazine detonating by 70%. Detonation is already a fairly low chance. You have to have that AoE explosion has to hit in a place where a magazine is, has to deplete the health of the magazine down to 0. Your ship has to be under a certain health threshold before it's eligible for detonation. In general, fairly rare. But if something's going to detonate, a DD is small enough to do it. And DDs are pretty crucial, so can recommend the detonation flag. But if you don't have the credits, if you are, doing the grind, maybe you're going to trade some health, which is totally okay. Trade some health for the Magazine Mod 1. It only costs, 100,000 something credits, and basically it saves you from running a flag and makes what was already an extremely low chance to even more extremely low. So I would recommend this. When I had a free-to-play account that I was playing, I did actually run Magazine Mod 1 while I was playing in randoms. I may have detonated once or twice over the course of 400 battles, but I only detonated once or twice over the course of 400 battles, so can recommend. If you're playing something where you're in ranked or you're playing clan battles or whatever, you might want to move the stats to a different module and just use the flag. Lastly, it's going to be Damage Control Party 1. It increases the consumable action time by 40%. For destroyers, not really a pick. DDs are going to have a fairly standard consumable action time of their DCP of 5 seconds. That means it would add an additional 2. If you're using a damage control party in the middle of a fight, very likely the fight may continue after your damage control party is down, in which case your engine could get knocked again, your rudder could get knocked again, you could be lit on fire again, which means you're detected from further ranges. In general, you want to save that DCP to where it's going to either save your life or it's going to let you completely disengage. So you have broken away from the enemy DD and you're going to put out the fires, fix your engines, etc. Or you are on double, triple fire and that amount of damage will kill you. You have to use your DCP. Hopefully you don't get lit on fire again and maybe you avoid the next 1 or 2 shells coming in, kind of thing. It's very easy to hit this button reflexively and burn your damage con while you're in the middle of a fight. That can get you killed, because if it goes down, you get lit on fire again, you may not have the ability to disengage because of the detection flare from a fire. So, in general, if I had to rate these, this one's pretty solid, this one is niche, this one is also niche, and this one is a no. So, in general, you're just going to be taking the one on the top. But again, if you want to save some credits while you're in randoms and you really don't want to worry about detonation, taking Magazine Mod 1 is okay. Moving on to slot 2, we have 3 options here. Damage control system, less chance of catching on fire, less chance of being flooded, the engine room protection, and engine boost mod 1. In general, engine boost mod 1 is going to be the gold standard for a DD, as most destroyers are going to have access to an engine boost consumable. Obviously, if you don't have it, you don't want to use the mod. In which case, engine room protection tends to be the better choice. Why? Damage control party is very important. It has a significant cooldown, although it's not massive, but still 40 seconds as a baseline isn't small. So if you had a 20% chance to save your DCP and not need to use it, that's better than having something break and being in a situation like, man, I wish I could accelerate faster right now. Man, I wish I could turn faster right now. So in general, does this have a chance to save you from using a DCP? Yes. Does it have a chance to save you if your DCP is used and it avoids a follow-up break? Yes. So this can save your behind. Engine boost mod would make your materials more at risk in terms, like you could have the engine break, you could have the rudder break, etc. But there's a lot of utility in having more raw engine power that in general this would be favored. Also gives you more positioning on the map, a little more oomph out of your consumables, so fun to use. Damage control system mod 1. Having less of a chance of being lit on fire is not bad, but if you're in a destroyer, you're not really looking to brawl. There are some brawly DDs, that's absolutely a thing, and there are some destroyers that are going to be lit all the effing time, but you're not really looking to brawl. And having a slightly reduced chance of catching fire, the only time that's really going to matter, other than the fact that, yeah, fire is some damage, is if you're trying to disengage, you get lit on fire, and now you're forced to use a damage con, or just be lit for longer because your detection went from 6 kilometers up to 8 kilometers, because when you are lit on fire, you get plus 2 kilometers of surface detection. As far as the risk of flooding reduction, if you eat a torp in a destroyer, you're probably dead. If you're not, you're severely wounded. The flood is the least of your concerns. In general, this is just not something that you're going to use. DDs are not made to be like battleships where they're just absorbing waves upon waves upon waves of shells and fire and whatever. You need to be deliberate with the health pool that you have and the interactions that you take. So, Tier 1, going to be Engine Boost Mod 1. It is a coal mod. Obviously, don't use it if you're not using Engine Boost or have a DD that doesn't have Engine Boost, in which case, Engine Room Protection is pretty much the choice. Slot 3, we got 5 options here. Main Battery Mod 2 increases your traverse speed. There are some destroyers, especially in the lower tiers, that have very slow turret traverse. This can make that less bad, but in general, it's not going to reach a breakpoint where it makes it magically comfortable. It just makes it slightly less bad. So if we look at the first DD line that I ground was the German DD line, and I think at tier 8 and below, maybe it's tier 7 and below, they have a fairly glacial turning speed. It's something like 20 seconds for the 180 degree. So this might make it a little more comfortable if you're turning during an engagement, as it might pull your gun slightly off target before they're able to turn back in. but it's not something that you would use as a mainstay. In general, for ships that are going to have slower turning speed, you need to have some planning before you take an engagement. They're not going to do well taking surprise engagements in which they were not prepped for. And while, yes, this would help you make your turrets turn a little faster, it's not the decisive difference. AA Gun Mod 1, unfortunately, this is kind of crap. If you like AA play, there is a niche case for it. For destroyers, you actually have a very powerful capability in your priority sector reinforcement. The action time is 10 seconds, the prep time, which means like the cooldown, is 10 seconds. But if you are able to, planes come into your area and you get the instantaneous damage off of your, I guess it's not listed here, that's too bad. But if you get the instantaneous damage in on planes, it's 5% of current health. So we'll do some really easy math on that and say if there's a 10 plane squadron that's full health and you deal 5% of all of that health, that's half of one of those planes. Done. It's kind of hilarious to use the Summers, which has like single-digit DPS in terms of anti-air, and you hit a button, and if you're against an FDR, you basically kill a plane. So, for the most part, people are just out there shooting spitballs, but then occasionally somebody throws a hand grenade that just blows the pilot out of the cockpit. It's a little weird, but hey man, don't question it. So what this module can do is it doesn't change the action time, so that's still 10 seconds, but it does change the prep time. It pulls 20% off. In this case, that would be 2 seconds. So if planes were coming in, you'll hit them with that instantaneous damage initially, which is going to hit for basically full value because it's a full health bar. But then they may attack, they're going to take AA damage from you, possibly some teammates, they're going to get chipped up. Maybe the planes that are coming back in are about half health by the time they do that, but this can give you an opportunity to have your priority sector back up to use before the second pass of the planes. Otherwise, sometimes they get in just before, just under the wire before you're able to hit the button again. But at that point, the squadron is at half health. 5% of half health is 2.5% health. Like, it's less. So in general, gonna have to say this one's niche. Just about never an option unless you decide I want to be the AA. Otherwise, there are other options to pick, like Aiming System Mod 1, basically a standard. Worth remembering that destroyers have excellent shell dispersion. The smaller the gun, okay, this is not a hard and fast rule, but the smaller the gun, the more accurate it is. The bigger the gun, the less accurate it is. I wouldn't necessarily say that holds true as an axiom, but in terms of a gameplay balance, battleships have massive guns. And when the battleship is firing at something, those massive guns could straight up just slaughter it. If you're firing at a cruiser and you get a bunch of citadels, all she wrote, blap, gone. Firing at another battleship and you happen to get into citadels or a carrier, etc. So having these large guns, if you can reliably rip into something, especially using overmatch, you can delete it, or you can deal severe amounts of damage, which can't really be mitigated outside of hiding in smoke or islands or just being somewhere else. Whereas when you start shrinking those turrets down to medium-sized turrets, you get a little more accurate because the potential damage is less punishing. You're more likely to weather salvos from a cruiser. They may still rip you up because the guns are not a joke, but you're more likely to weather salvos from a cruiser that are coming in. And for a destroyer with the smaller guns in general, you're going to be able to weather many salvos from a DD, so the dispersion on the shells much, much, much more forgiving, which means you're going to be good at not only peppering cruisers if you feel safe enough to do so, peppering battleships, peppering others, but you'll be able to have the accurate fire needed to work on other destroyers. Destroyers being fairly small, they can be kind of hard to hit. It's probably actually harder to hit a destroyer than it is to hit a sub, because a sub will take damage even if you miss, whereas a destroyer does have to contact. So there's a little bit of nuance there. Aiming systems still tends to be a primary pick for any ship that's going to be using guns a lot, because it reduces the main battery dispersion by 7%, which I don't know the actual math on that one, but probably reduces like the possible area of shell draw, like shell, where the shells can go by something like 15 to 20%, maybe 12 to 15%. It's a significant difference. That being said, will you notice it? Maybe, maybe not. In general, most of your shells are going to fall to the center. Most of your shells are going to connect with what you're firing at. So this is an upgrade that makes it nicer, but it doesn't necessarily mean the difference between winning or losing. Also worth it. It does deal with secondaries, but most DDs do not have those, and it helps your torpedo traverse speed, which is always nice. Going to torpedo mod 1. Torpedo speed increased by 5%. Traverse speed, again, by the 20%. So really, if you're picking an offensive one, the torpedo traverse goes better. And risk of your torp tubes being incapacitated reduced by 40%. That does not mean broken. If your torp tubes hit 0 health, they break. But it does reduce the chance that they get knocked out temporarily because of a stray bomb or a stray shell hit or something like that. And torps take a while to reload, so that is quite nice. Torp tube mod 1, I would actually argue, is more important than aiming system mod 1 if you care about your torpedoes on your ship. Why? With aiming with guns, the shell flight time is pretty manageable. Well, really, it's up to you to manage. How far you are away from a target is how far you're going to be trying to make those shots. So that's really on you as far as where your placement is and what your target selection is. I can personally hit shells out to about 10 second lead time. I can do more against a battleship that's deciding to be kind of slow or whatever, but 10 seconds is really where it starts to get pretty uncomfortable to land shells. But you can consistently, reliably land shells. Whether you have the 7% shell dispersion change or not, destroyers are accurate enough that you will reliably land shells, even at that distance. Whereas torpedoes are going to have a point where they're detected. So if we look over here on the right, you'll see torpedo tubes, torpedo speed down here, 74 knots. And below that, it says detectability range 1.7. So that means to the unaided eye, your torps will be detected 1.7 kilometers from a target. If they're running hydro, they might be detected further. If they're running specific commander skills on a battleship, they might be detected further. But in general, they're going to be detected 1.7 kilometers away. So your torps, moving as fast as they move, are going to have 1.7 kilometers worth of distance to close that gap and hit their target before your target evades. In some cases, you're going to have, for instance, if we look at the Yugang, Yugang has deep water torps, which have a detectability range of only 800 meters, sub 1 kilometer. So these things can pop up almost out of nowhere. Oh crap, there they are, and hit you. Now, they do have some disadvantages. They don't hit subs, they don't hit DDs, but the fact that they have such a low detection range means that the torpedo speed is a little less of a constraint because there's much less time to react as a base. However, the Yuang having 0.8, whereas we were just on the Hayate, which has 0.7, almost twice as much, actually a little more than twice as much time to react. The more speed you can give the torpedo, the more likely it crosses that gap and gets a hit before the player is able to evade. So, if you look at these, you fully break them down. Aiming system, you're in a DD, you're accurate, your gunfire is accurate enough that you're probably going to be applying almost all the shells that are going to hit in general. Not all the shells always, but you're going to, it could be the difference of if you're firing 6 shells, you're probably going to hit 3 or 4. If you have the aiming systems 1, maybe it's more consistently 4. But the output should be similar compared to torpedo tubes where the difference of that additional second or two could be the difference between the torpedo hitting or not, which is 15 to 20,000 damage, whatever, depending on the torpedo itself. The amount of additional damage that a torpedo can carry is so much more than a single shell here or there. Now, the single shells add up, but I don't know. Anyway, it's a controversial choice. It's up to you. But for me, if you have if you're in a boat where you're thinking, I really want to make sure I land some torpedoes this game, you probably want Torp Tube Mod 1. If you're thinking, I'm just going to gunboat the crap out of everything I see and be happy about it, take Aiming Systems Mod 1. It's a lot of time to take on this section, my apologies, but it is actually an interesting decision. And then lastly, Smoke Generator Mod 1 will give you additional action time on your smoke. It will also give Smoke Curtain Generator additional action time, but that's for a different class. What this means is if you're taking a destroyer for smoke, probably in a team setting, like a clan battle setting, or because you just, or a division setting, or because you happen to like supportive play. For instance, if you take a Gearing, Gearing has an excellent smoke in that it has a long dispersion. You can see I even have the mod here. It has a long action time of 39.6 while buffed. I don't actually think I have this, but it could go even further if I took a commander skill. And the screen itself is going to last for over 2 minutes, 130 seconds. So if you drop a smoke line, 40 seconds of time pulling left to right, taking a large amount of real estate on a flank, you can block a lot of vision, and cruisers can use that. Battleships that are at a significant distance can use that, depending on how you lay it. And that additional 20% means your line itself can be longer. That could run the distance from one island to the next island, meaning that you have island, smoke island, everything behind it is line of sight blocked to an extent. And there's a smoke firing range, but still, that could be pretty massive. Versus if you don't have that additional 20%, you might have to block a portion of the gap because you might not be able to extend the full duration of the gap. It's okay, but it really comes down to what you're trying to do. I would label this one as niche. This is going to be something that you are choosing to do because you are choosing to care about your smoke because you have a plan in mind. If you don't have a plan in mind, it's aiming systems or torp. Pick your poison. Moving on to slot 4. Damage control system mod 1. You have less fire, less flooding time. Doesn't matter. DDs in general don't take a lot of dot damage. They don't take a massive amount of fire damage, massive amount of flood damage. The fires don't last very long, especially considered like if you were comparing them to battleships and such. I don't have the timings off the top of my head, but in general, this is not something as a DD that you were ever overly concerned about. Oh no, he lit me on fire. The worst thing about fire is actually the detection flare, as opposed to the raw damage. So nope, this one's definitely not a thing. I'm going to avoid this one because this is really the coolest one. But steering gear mod 1, you can pull some time off your rudder shift. You will notice there are some destroyers that don't give you an option here. For instance, the Daring. The Daring does not have the propulsion. It only has steering gear mod 1 because propulsion is built in to the UK DD line. It's not really notated anywhere, but it's just one of them things, you know? And then moving on, we have depth charges mod 1. It gives you an additional number of charges. What does that mean? So let's go ahead and pick a thing. There we go. We don't have anything on this one, so we're going to look at depth charges. We have number of charges 2, bombs in a charge 18. So basically, your G key is going to slowly build up power until you're ready to use it. If you pick the depth charges, it's going to go from a total of two charges you can use until they reload to 4. So if you are able to get on top of a destroyer, the bombs, for instance, on a Lucian, being that this is a Pan-Asian DD, only do 2100 damage. Unless it's a direct hit, it's going to deal a percentage of that damage. So you drop a lot of bombs, but they don't hit very hard. Maybe 2 racks isn't enough because you're going to miss some. Again, splash damage is going to be out at range. So having some additional means if you're able to close to a sub, you might have more than enough in the way of charges to just kill it outright. Without this mod, that may not be the case. This is a niche interaction though. So you might prefer to take this with something like a Daring. Daring in general has 5,000 damage per depth charge, so probably just going to straight up kill him anyway. But if it was something that you wanted to use your Hydra with, try to go after some subs, do some sub hunting, you can absolutely look into depth charge mod 1. This is going to be niche. Basically, if you're hunting subs, you're going to know you're hunting subs, so it's a mod for you. But then going back to the king of them all, it's going to be propulsion mod 1. Why is this the king of them all? Take time taken to reach full engine power when accelerating. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to a commander skill here, which is Last Stand. The ship remains partially able to sustain speed and maneuverability with the engine and steering gears incapacitated. Now, we talked a little earlier over in the slot 2 about how engine room protection can save you an engine. When your engine is knocked, you accelerate more slowly. When your engine is knocked, somebody knocked out your engine, which means you're probably in a firefight, which means you're probably getting hurt. When you're getting hurt, there's a really good chance that you don't want to get hurt anymore. So having propulsion mod 1 is going to counteract, to an extent, the damage that your engine has sustained to be able to get you to speed to get you out. Now, obviously, if you want to stay in the fight, by all means, stay in the fight, kill the enemy. If you've got the advantage, do the thing. But if you're ever surprised, taken unawares, or just happen to be in a situation that you want to get the heck out of, propulsion mod 1 can overtake the engine debuff to get you out of that situation. As a DD player, you get really used to having this mod, and if for some reason you ever swap it out or you just don't take it, when you get into a fight, you feel so extremely kludgy, like, whoa, where's my engine power? Why am I getting wrecked here? It's because you get used to this being baked in and how it allows you to continue to accelerate even when you are debuffed. It is the king. It is the greatest. Pick it. Have fun. You can, of course, pick steering gear mods if you want to play something at long range and do, shell jukey stuff. You can, of course, pick depth charges if you want to go after subs because that's fun. I would never pick damage control system mod 2, but propulsion mod, probably the king. So we'll move. That's a unique mod if you were like, what is that? There are 4 options here. Now, if we go back to torpedoes and we see the detection was 1.7, granted, if I show you Yu-Yang torps, that's not really going to work very well because as a destroyer, you're invulnerable to them. But there is something, a torpedo lookout system. So torpedo lookout system will override the detection characteristics of a torp to allow you to see it at further distance. You can see it all the way out to 1.8 kilometers. So if you were screening for your battleship and there were deep water torps from a Yu-Yang coming in, rather than being able to spot them 0.8 kilometers away from your ship, you would be able to spot them 1.8 kilometers from your ship. Not insignificant, although probably niche. You might want to use this in a coordinated environment if you want to use it at all. Most people do not. However, I will point out, this is a little bit of a poor man's hydro. Not all torpedoes have terrible detection. If we look at, for instance, the gearing, I think the gearing has some pretty rockin' torpedoes over here that can threaten DDs. They have a detection of 1.4. If we look at another ship called the Black, which I think is a tier 8 USDD, it has an even lower detection threshold on torps that absolutely can hit destroyers. And having the additional ability to spot them is not small. But I would still say it's niche. Steering gear mod 2, some people use this on the Khabarovsk because its steering is terrible. You can use this if you like being a wiggly boat, specifically something if you're playing it out at range, maybe a Kleber or something that you're just going to farm at 14, 15, 17 some kilometers, whatever. You could absolutely take this if that's what your gig is. I don't think most people do. And Ship Consumable mod 1 is an interesting choice. It can give you additional duration on your engine boost. Could give you additional duration on your smoke screen. Could give you additional duration on a main battery reload booster. Can give you additional action time on your consumables. But if you are taking this, you are sacrificing the possibility to take the mod that all DDs want to take, which is concealment systems. So when you are playing Destroyer, as this is kind of the intro to DD class, most people are going to memorize what's the best detection on a Destroyer. The Shimikaze is 5.6. A Kagero, I think, is 5.4. Gearing is 5.8. Summer is 5.8. Z52 is 6.1. When you look at the concealment, you're going to look at ships that don't have any mods or any commander skills. They're going to tell you a number that is much higher that probably most people don't know because instead they memorize the least amount. Fortunately, this is also shown by the tab key in game. If you hit tab and you hover over the enemy ship, it will tell you the best possible characteristics that your enemy could have, whether they do or do not have them. So this can give you the information which is going to help you know, are you out-detected by an enemy destroyer, or do you out-detect them? That can be extremely powerful in how you play a destroyer, because when you're on the front line, if your detection is 500 meters worse than the destroyer across from you, they might be able to get you lit, and as long as they're angled away, if you try to push them to get them lit back, they could just back up. You're lit, they're not. Their friends are shooting at you, your friends are not shooting at them. That's going to go badly for you. This is also part of the interaction where destroyers have frustrations dealing with submarines. They are lit by a submarine. Do I push the sub? Can I, if I push the sub, can I light it? Can I get a grip on it? Or is this going to be a frivolous endeavor? Where somebody has to weigh that in their head. Concealment mod is going to give you the best concealment possible so that you can avoid having an outspotting interaction. Worth noting that at tier 7, a lot of DDs don't have access to this, so their detection tends to be kind of rough. You'll find a lot of destroyers. Comfortable destroyer play is going to key in around 6 kilometers or less. You'll find a lot of 5.8s, you'll find some 5.6s, whatever, but 6 kilometers tends to be kind of that comfortable place that destroyer players learn as sort of a general rule. If it's above 6, it starts getting uncomfortable. If it's below 6, it starts getting very comfortable. In general, you're almost always going to pick this. The only time you would pick something else is steering geared mod 2, where you're going to play at range. You're literally going to be lit because you're shooting at stuff anyway. So you just want to be wiggly so you don't get hit. You're playing in, I guess, a division or something. Most people would never take this on a destroyer, but I will give you a caveat to that in just a moment. And then ship consumable mod 1, I'm going to say the exact same thing, that this one is extremely niche. You might use it to make a heal better, or again, like a smoke longer, but outside of that, this is a deliberate choice. This one is just the baseline, just do it. Torpedo lookout system, the only other reason I can recommend as to why you might take this, when I first started DDs, I started with German DDs. German DDs come with hydro. So that actually helped me a lot as a player, because you don't necessarily think through all the interactions that you're going to experience as soon as you pick up a ship. It's just not something that you do. But, let me double check something. Just want to make sure I clicked a button. I did. Rocket. You're not going to think through all the interactions that you're going to go through in a ship. And as a DD, when you're approaching a cap, you might not think, I'm probably going to get torped by the enemy destroyer, especially if I use a smoke screen. So you're going to go into the thing, you might use smoke. Okay, cool. I've used smoke. I'm not going to be spotted now. Oh, torps, and then you get nailed. Happens to a lot of people, especially when they're new to destroyer. They don't think that process through. Starting as a German destroyer, I had hydro. But that meant that the next destroyer line or the next type of destroyer I played didn't have hydro. I didn't have that crutch to fall on, which meant I often got surprised in ways I didn't expect. This is kind of a budget hydro on a ship that wouldn't have it otherwise. Again, very niche use. Meh, but it is theoretically a use case, so I'm pointing it out. Slot 6. These ones are pretty basic. You're just about never going to take this for secondaries because most DDs don't have secondaries. But if you really wanted to dial into the AA format for like a Holland, this can increase your continuous and your flak by 15%, which, because AA stacks multiplicatively, it's more than you think. Especially when you combine it with defensive fire, which not only is going to work multiplicatively with this, but it's going to increase the amount of flak that you kick out. If we looked at a Holland, which is over here somewhere, boop, there we go. If we look at a Holland and we check out the AA defenses on it, the damage from shell explosions is 6. So its base amount of flak is going to be 6. If you took this as a slot 6 module, you would increase that up to 8, which matters if I go into a deeper dive on AA, which I won't because this is about destroyers, but it's not an insignificant increase, especially if you are playing with a second ship that is also adding in flak. The way that it stacks can make for a better interaction. And theoretically, there's a commander skill that could add another one and get you up to 9. Some people that play Hollands, especially if you're going against lesser experienced CV players, when you kick on your defensive fire, you murder face some planes. Having more flak allows you to murder face some planes even harder. Okay, moving on to the normal ones. We're going to have main battery mod 3, which will allow you to shoot faster with a little worse turret traverse. Nobody cares about the worse turret traverse. They only care about the increased reload speed, so pretty much it's a standard. If you're going to use your guns, you want it. If you're not really going to use your guns, if you're going to lean on torpedoes, you're probably picking Torp Tubes mod 2, so you can increase your torpedo output. Granted, it does make it more likely that your torpedoes can be incapacitated. That's not broken, but incapacitated, meaning basically if you're in a firefight, it's more likely your torps will be knocked offline, which can really suck if you're in the middle of like a 1.5 to 2 minute reload. You get to start all over again. No fun. But if you are playing with Torp Tubes mod 2, you're probably not looking for gunfights. You're probably just looking for opportunities, which means staying back and avoiding shells in the first place so that you can lean on your torpedo throughput. And then we also have gunfire control system, which is going to increase firing range. This is not widely used because of a commander skill. When you run the math on this, this gives you 12% better reload. This gives you 16% better range. When you look at the commander skills, let me grab something that has a commander in it. When you look at your commander skills, this gives you 20% additional range, not 16, although it's for 4 skill points, and this gives you 12% better reload rate, not just 5, although it's for 3 skill points. In general, if you want more range, you would not pick the slot 6 that gives you more range, you would pick this commander talent. If you wanted more reload, you could pick this, but you would probably make sure that you pick the slot 6 for reload as well, or in lieu of that. So because of these commander skills, your slot 6 interaction really is governed by this. There is two instances, that I can think of where you might take not only main battery and AA expert for increased range, but also the slot 6 that gives you additional range. That would be either the Elbing or the Kleber. Some people think double range Kleb is kind of a meme, but the ballistics on it are nice enough that it can work. And people could also tell you the same thing about the Elbing, that it could be a meme, but the shell ballistics are chef's kiss, absolutely funtacular. You can make the Elbing work out all the way to maximum range if you decide to do something like that. All right, so that's going to be all of the upgrades that you can choose from. In general, the main ones you're going to pick: main armament mod 1, engine room protection in slot 2, aiming systems or torp tubes, depending on which one you like. Do you want guns or do you want torps? Almost always, you're going to end up picking propulsion mod 1, unless you're in a UKDD and you literally can't. Concealment is extremely important for DDs. If you choose not to use it, you're probably an advanced user, and you're doing that because you are making an advanced decision not to use it. Or you might be an uninformed user, and you're not picking it because you don't know better. One of those two things, either advanced or not. And then seasoned to taste, main battery output or torpedo output. AA is, I wouldn't necessarily call it for the memes, but it's niche. And as far as firing range, you're probably not going to use it at all because there are other options that exist. You can move on over to commander skills. So commander skills, when I teach carriers, I have kind of like the basic 9. The things that you almost always take as a carrier, because there's just about no reason not to take them. They're always helpful, always. The same thing applies for DDs. It's the first 10 points. Preventative maintenance makes a little less likely that your stuff gets knocked out. Also, it increases your AA mounts and secondaries, if that matters. The AA mounts more so because DDs do have AA. Secondary is niche, but this can potentially save you a damage con, which can potentially save you a ship. So absolutely preventative maintenance all the way. If you're an advanced user, you can opt not to take these skills. You can put your points elsewhere. But if you are not an advanced user, you want these 10 points until you can figure out, where your comfort lies. Moving on to the next one is last stand. When your rudder gets knocked out, not if. When your engine gets knocked out, not if, you will still be able to make turns. You will still be able to accelerate and move. And as a destroyer, your ship is not heavily armored. You are not protected in the way that bigger ships are. Cruisers may have more protection against rudder damage or engine damage. Battleships certainly have more protection against engine or rudder. But DDs, your compartments are just about right out to the edge, and you don't have a lot of armor protecting them, so they will be knocked out up, down, left, right, and center. Last stand is absolutely important. Advanced users can choose not to take this, but you're going to be putting yourself in positions where you're farming at range, or you're going to be putting yourself in positions where you feel that you will never take a fight you can't win. This is extremely important, especially if you are trying to get out of a fight that you cannot win. Speaking of that, survivability expert. More health means less dead. If you are playing a destroyer that you don't expect to take action, congratulations, you can conserve your health that way. But enemies are pretty good at finding you because they want to find you and they want to beat your ship to scrap. You might be radared, you might be plane spotted, you might be run down by a random DD that has no reason to be there. You might end up catching a torpedo that has no reason to be there. There could be a variety of different situations that force you to need more health, and this gives you more health. So just about in general, health always matters because health means less dead. And then lastly, concealment. For all the reasons that we talked about in slot 5. Having your detection be as low as possible is important because of how it relates to the other DDs that you're going to interact with. You need to have the best chance to either get close to your objectives, close with the enemy, or have less of a detection difference so that the enemy has less chance to bully you off of things. Again, even a 500 meter distance, is enough for an enemy DD to shadow you, keeping you lit and allowing their teammates to take shots at you while you may not be able to forcibly spot them back. These first 10 points pretty much work with every DD line always. You just about never go wrong with these 10 points in this area as a starting thing for any destroyer that you want to play. After that, you start seasoning to taste. Going through the ones at slot 1 points, grease the gears. Some DDs, as mentioned before, have turret traverse that can be a little rough. The only time you really dial into grease the gears is if you have a DD that can outturn your turrets. So I think with the Kleb, sometimes when you're turning, you might turn faster than your turrets will be able to keep on target, depending on where you are. So having that can make it a little more comfortable, but you could also just not turn as hard. So that's up to you. Additional flooding. The way that flooding works is a little counterintuitive. This doesn't mean you have a 30% greater chance to get a flood. It means you have an additive amount on top of your flood. In basic language, a torpedo from a destroyer probably has something like a 300% flood chance, which seems a little weird. If you hit the bow of a ship that has no protection, there's a really good chance you set a flood. If you hit the stern of a ship that has no torpedo protection, there's a really good chance you set a flood, because 300% is going to be coming up against some modifiers, minus 5% here, maybe some reduction else there, but you're still over 100% you're going to apply. When you hit torpedo defenses, though, your torpedo flood chance can be cut by a third. So that 300% chance can be reduced down to 100. It can be further reduced by upgrades, skills, things that are going to reduce likelihood of being flooded. So instead of, if you've ever wondered why did I get a torpedo hit on something but I didn't actually cause a flood, it could be because you hit torpedo protection, it significantly reduced the chance of a flood, and because of that it didn't cut through. So for, I think, like Holland Torps have a smaller payload. They have probably something like a 240% or 270% chance of a flood. This plus 30 is going to get them closer to that 300%. So if they hit torpedo protection, they still apply, or they have at least a better chance of applying in case of other modifiers and such. So it looks pretty cool, but it's worth keeping it in perspective. It's more, which is nice. You can think of it as roughly a 10% greater chance to get a flood. Moving on, we have Consumable Specialist. Absolutely a fantastically great talent. There are some ships that live and die by consumables. They want their smoke, they want their main battery, they want their heal, although I don't think this affects heal. They want to be able to use their speed. They want to use radar. This can lower the cooldown on that, make it a little more present if you're trying to bring consumables to the party. So absolutely worth the single point if you've got it to spare. Gunfeeder is a remarkably awesome talent for ships that have long reloads or ships that need to shell swap in battle. To give you some perspective on this, I've played a lot of Z52. I haven't played it a lot lately, but I've played a lot of Z52. If we look at the artillery, it doesn't take a long time to reload, 3.3 seconds. Not a long time. But if you'll notice, under the reload time, there's a minimum shell switching type, or minimum shell switching time of 2 seconds. So if I'm fighting an enemy destroyer and they are flat broadside to me, if I throw armor piercing at them, the armor piercing, because destroyers don't have a lot of armor, it's going to punch right through. It's going to overpen. So I'm going to deal 3,200 damage, 10% of that, 325. I would be better throwing a high explosive shell at it that's not going to overpen and deal 500 damage. But if the destroyer starts to angle, angled armor ends up being a thicker traverse. If you think of kind of like a right angle triangle, that longer area takes longer to go through the metal, so to speak. So that 19 millimeters of armor might thicken up to 20, 21, 22, 23 millimeters, but still be at an angle where your AP shells are going to bite into the ship. So if you happen to see that an enemy destroyer is trying to disengage, as they're turning and presenting angle, rather than doing a shell switch that's going to take a full 3.3 seconds to swap, you could use this in the middle of a reload cycle, not lose any time at all, as long as it's 2 seconds or less into the reload, and swap over to AP. And I have, in the past, been able to land 6,000 damage salvos on an enemy destroyer by getting Z52 guns to connect while it's angled using AP. That's a fun time. That's like a quarter of a destroyer's health at tier 10. That's a hell of a chunk. So it's not going to be for everything. There are some ships that are going to be pretty cruise control to awesome, where you just kind of pick one shell type and that's what you do. Literally, if you play Gdansk, you only have the one shell type. But if you have a niche case where you have a longer reload shell, where you might conceivably want to swap, or you have something where you've got two options, maybe SAP and then something else, and you really do want to swap between the two, or potentially you're running a German ship where the AP hits really hard, but it's conditional. If you're going to be swapping between HE and AP, you really don't have the time to do the full reload, you can use it for that. Moving on, there's incoming fire alert, which will tell you if people are shooting at you. Usually you can tell that people are shooting at you because there's splashes in the water and there's the loud sound of getting hit by shells. But if you're actively trying to shell juke and you've got a point that you can spend, you could pop it in there. That's definitely up to you. On the 2-point skill line, you have demolition expert. So +1 chance for a fire. Does this matter? In the aggregate, sure. You know, you fire 100 shells, you get 100 hits. Theoretically, that's one additional fire that you wouldn't have had before. The better way that I can recommend looking at it is going to be, what is the percentage compared to your current fire chance? So if we look at the fire chance right now, we have 8%. Okay, so out of 100 shell hits, theoretically we get 8 fires. Realistically, there's fire prevention on ships, there's modifiers, there's other stuff. You might be hitting a place that's already on fire, you can't light it on fire again, so the real number is going to be less. But in terms of what your potential output is, if you had 8% and you add 1% more, that brings it up to 9. Mathematically, that ends up being a 12.5% increase in fire set in the match, because you've increased your chance to set fire by 12.5% relative to what it was before. Versus if you had a shell that was so effing huge that you had a 50% chance to set a fire, adding 1%, you probably won't even notice it. It doesn't exist. Functionally, it's going to be imperceptible. So ideally, if you had like a destroyer that had a 1% fire chance, adding in this skill doubles your chance to get fire. It's still pretty terrible, but theoretically, you probably spit out a crap load of shells, so you'll get fires over the long term. Easy way to look at it is, in general, you can just see it as, hey, it's free damage. If I set a fire, I do more damage, so more damage is yay. But the better way to kind of compare, is this something that I'm going to find valuable, is to look at your chance of setting a fire on whole. Moving on, we have Swift Fish. Again, torpedo speed, extremely powerful. The less time an enemy has to react once the torpedoes are spotted, the more likely the torpedo hits. And torpedoes tend to hit hard. So you want your torps to hit. If you're ever in a situation where you're trying to rely on torpedo damage to any significant extent, this is absolutely a 2-point skill that you should be looking at. Moving on, consumable enhancements. Get a little longer duration on your engine boost, your hydro, again, I don't think that works for heals, but radar, certainly, smoke, very useful talent if you're going consumable. You may not really worry about your consumables. That's certainly a pick for you. And this is, I'll be honest, a little meme-ish. Heavier AP shells. This is, if you're taking more damage in terms of AP, or really more damage in terms of anything, you're increasing what's known as an alpha strike. So if you had guns that took a minute to reload in a destroyer, maybe your alpha strike would be like 10,000 damage. Bam! Half an enemy destroyer is gone in a single salvo, but then you don't get to shoot again for a really long time. Increasing your alpha strike means if you're against a wounded ship, a single salvo might volley them off the field. Gone. Or this is good for ambushing. This is good for opening a fight with a heavy hit, so that it already puts you in the lead in terms of that damage interaction, to which the enemy is now immediately on the defensive. They might be trying to get away, they might be trying to damage mitigate, they might be trying to do something that's not fully committing to making you dead, because you've got such a heavy hit on the outset that it really freaks them out. This can absolutely be useful for that. I happen to have it on the Z52 just because the AP on German AP outperforms its HE in terms of damage by so much that it's kind of fun to dial in on it. But realistically, the amount of AP shells I'm going to throw in the Z52 is probably fairly small. So this is niche. It's a personal choice. The one that the two pointers here that you'll almost use... I'm sorry. The 2-pointers here that you're going to dial in most are going to be Last Stand, because it's amazing. You're going to be looking at Demolition Expert, because it's damage, and everybody loves damage. And Swift Fish, because it translates to damage, and everybody loves damage. Outside of that, a little niche. Priority Target, it'll tell you how many people are trying to kill you. I find this to be almost a waste of time. So, if you're spotted, you're in a DD. People are trying to kill you. Assume that they're all trying to kill you. Moving on to the 3-point talents, we have additional main battery reload, also AA. So if you wanted to dial into the AA fantasticness of a Holland, sure, you could definitely get this because you want more AA. Most destroyers are not going to be focusing on that aspect of their ship. Really, it just comes down to people will see this as it's 5% reduction in your gun reload. That's cool. Again, the slot 6 mod gives 12%. And this is 3 commander skill points. So you could absolutely pick it up if you're in a gunboat and you just want more output. But you don't necessarily need to do that, because if you have a limited point budget, you may actually get more from having the additional range, so that you in a small maneuverable ship can fire at something from safety, as opposed to firing at something from a close enough range where they're going to consistently apply damage to you. So not only will you be having your... more reload from having your slot 6 set to main battery reload while you've got your commander points for more range, as opposed to vice versa, it can enable some fun. If you're going pure gun built, not a bad choice. Can recommend. Thumbs up. Yeehaw. Next, we've got Fill the Tubes with Torpedo Tube reload time, minus 10%. Pure Torp build only. It's always nice to have stuff reload a little faster. Having your torps back up is fun, but unless you are going to dial in on your torpedo playstyle, don't take it. When you're throwing torpedoes, you need to be in a position to land the torpedoes. You can't just throw them for the hell of it. If you're throwing them while bow in, if you're throwing them while you have no idea what the enemy's going to do, the likelihood that they're going to hit is extremely low. Even for the best players, hit rates on torpedoes expected to be single-digit percentile. Having the ability to throw them slightly faster is cute, but it doesn't matter. But if you're in a torpedo boat and that is how you are planning to interact, how you are planning to position through the entirety of the match, sure, do that. Otherwise, 3 points is almost too much to spend on this. You could be putting it somewhere else. Like Adrenaline Rush. As you take damage, because all DDs will expect to take damage, your main battery reload is faster, your torpedo reload is faster. Also, your AA goes up, should that matter. Again, talking about the Holland or any specific ship where the AA is potent. The biggest thing that AA can do right now for a DD in general is if CV comes over and drops fighters, having enough AA will allow you to chisel down the fighters to stop that as a spotting threat. If you have mediocre AA, having it be slightly better, fighters have very little health, so they can be pretty quickly chewed through if you're close. That can be useful in that sense. But in general, Adrenaline Rush is going to be taken by almost anybody and everybody, because almost anybody and everybody is going to take damage during a match, which means additional damage output. Everybody loves damage output. So Adrenaline Rush, pretty much considered a core skill. Moving on, Inertial Fuse for HE shells. This one is a little tricky, and it really comes down to what ship you're going to play. First off, probably just using it for gunboats. But second off, you need to think of armor thresholds. What does that mean? If we look at a gearing, or maybe this isn't a great choice because I should be picking something that's a little lower tier, but I think all this stuff is higher tier, so whatever. If we look at a gearing, we're going to see that for HE, the armor pen is 21 millimeters. So 25% increase from inertial fuse for HE is going to give it roughly 5 more millimeters of thickness to pen through. So it goes from 21 to 26. That doesn't really matter tier 8 and up because battleships, their basic armor is 32 millimeters. So outside of hitting superstructure, you're not going to hit them anyway. And you'd already pen superstructure without IFHE, so who cares? Coming in against cruisers, there are several cruisers, especially heavy cruisers, that'll start rocking 27 millimeter, 30 millimeter in places, and that's just going to be too thick for the HE to pen anyway. So you're still shooting for superstructure because superstructure tends to be weak enough that HE can hit it in most situations in general. Firing at other DDs, most DDs are going to be affected by HE pen of 21. I think a lot of DDs tend to have about 19 millimeters of armor, so you don't get anything there. The bigger interaction is going to be for in the middle tiers when you have battleships that have 26 millimeters of armor, meaning that your destroyer can go from penning only the superstructure of a battleship to penning the base armor all over the battleship. So if you look at a Colorado is covered in 26. If you look at there's a variety of different ships, usually French, UK, and US, which will have kind of a baseline basic armor scheme. They might be tanky, but the armor that they're using is not extremely thick. Although in the middle tier, sometimes you get aggressively armored stuff because, sure. Having this be up to 26 millimeters allows you to interact with battleships very consistently. And it goes from being a destroyer that doesn't want to use their guns and kind of only torp stuff to, screw it, man, I'll use my guns and I'll rip this battleship in half. It's a big difference. Also, having the additional pen can allow you to interact more reliably against cruisers, but cruisers have good DPM and pretty decent accuracy, so in general, you don't want to screw around with cruisers. I would say that's a little bit more of an advanced tactic, but if you were going to screw around with cruisers, the Kleb has larger guns, has 23 millimeters of pen. So if we add that 5, maybe 6 millimeter almost is what it is, that brings us up to 28. And then suddenly we've broken the 27 millimeter threshold, where if you were going against a Baltimore that's covered in 27, you hit it anywhere with HE and it takes damage. That matters. Against tier 8 ships, very important. Against tier 9 ships, less important. Against tier 10, well, even less important. But still, it's an important breakpoint to remember. Being able to go up to the 28 can make it extremely powerful if you're in a tier 8 ranked season, if you're in a tier 8 clan battle season. So if you were playing a French DD that has some of the larger guns, you can make that happen. And Fontask and stuff, they do have these larger 139 millimeter guns that can make that work for them. Continuing on, Superintendent used to be consumable expert, I think. Having more consumables is nice. Having more consumables does not necessarily matter. Having a heals are awesome. If you have a heal, you probably almost always want Superintendent because more healing is great. But it does come down to, are you actually going to use all of the charges? Are you going to use all of your speed boosts? Are you going to use all of your smokes? Are you going to use all of your hydros? So for instance, I think my Z52, the reason to take this is because I could have 4 smokes over the duration of a match if I'm playing very safe and I'm using my high explosive to work on battleships. Because the high explosive here has 32 millimeters of pen, so I can rip into some battleships in ways that other destroyers can't, and using the additional range, I can make that synergy work out. If I didn't have this additional range, and I was just looking to be a frontline, catch as catch can, I'm just going to take the opportunities that come along my way, it might actually be better to move Superintendent over to Survivability Expert because I'm looking for a scrap. I'm not necessarily looking to play safe and interact, I'm looking to fight. And because I'll probably only use maybe 3 smokes, 3 hydros, or 2 hydros probably in a match, I don't need the additional ones, so there's not really much of a reason to put the 3 points there. Moving on to the 4th line. Dazzle, I think Dazzle is... Some people say that Dazzle is bugged. I think Dazzle has an order of operations issue. I've done some testing in a training room where if you are locked onto a DD and the DD goes dark, and then the DD comes back because it gets spotted again by radar or you spot it or whatever, technically the dazzle effect is going to apply and it's going to make your dispersion worse. However, I think because you have previously you've previously locked the target, I think that information stays locked, meaning your dispersion isn't affected because you were locked onto the target or something. However, if you are locked on a different target, when the DD with dazzle becomes lit, the dazzle effect goes live, shiny or whatever. And when somebody locks onto you while the dazzle effect is live, they're going to have a worse dispersion against you for the duration of the effect. So if you are using dazzle in a situation where you're constantly brawling with somebody, you may not actually see much in the way of a result because they might still be locked onto you in between yourself being spotted. But if you were very infrequently to pop in and pop out, maybe because you were an AA ship, you light off your AA, you get spotted briefly, you turn off your AA, you go dark. Maybe because you were a torpedo ship that you were really courting the front line, you're not necessarily diving in all the time. That could work out for you too. But in general, a lot of people are going to be doing frontline interactions, and when you start getting locked into a brawl, you tend to stay into a brawl until you can fully extricate yourself from the situation. Dazzle does not necessarily save you there. This is considered a niche pick. It did actually get a buff to its ship speed, which is kind of a cool buff, but this is not taken very often, and probably worth remembering the order of operations if you're going to try to apply it. At least this is what my training room testing showed me. Moving on, Fearless Brawler gives you an additional flak. Basically, if you're going to be in the open firing, if you're an open water gunboat, an open water whatever, open water means a CV can have multiple angles to come in on you. So if you're trying to hold your position or be less likely to be pushed off by a CV, it gives you an additional flak. So you have a little more staying power in what you're trying to do, or maybe if you're trying to protect others. But if you are detected, your main battery fires a little faster. Love this for Russian DDs with a lot of engine speed and being detected at range because you're just working on battleships, working on targets that you can apply damage to. Also, French DDs. Fantabulous. French DDs don't have smoke. You're going to be lit. You might as well get more reload while doing it. So 4 points, I think pretty well invested. This is 3 points for a 5%. This is 4 points for a 10%. It just ends up netting you out pretty well. You can, of course, combine the two. RPF, or radio location as it's called now, it points to the closest enemy ship. Or submarine that is at surface or periscope depth. When it goes to maximum depth, the radio location will jump to the next nearest target. But this is useful for ranked, useful for clan battles. I actually used it on IJN destroyers because when we were talking about the detection thing, an IJN destroyer might have only a detection bump of about 100 to 200 meters on a target. And that can be too close for comfort in terms of really keeping them spotted without keeping yourself spotted. But if you have radio location, you will have a really good idea as to where the enemy destroyer is to be able to set yourself up to spot them without being spotted. Now, it's going to tell the enemy that they're located, that somebody has radio location on them specifically, so that may change the way that they play. They may know that there's a destroyer or a cruiser in the area that could be threatening them. And they may opt to play differently, safer, potentially more aggressively in the sense that I bet there's an IJN DD and he's going to try to rush me. I'm going to rush him instead. Whatever. You are giving the enemy information, but you are getting information to use. Very valuable for clan battles and ranked in the sense that there are smaller teams and information is a premium in a coordinated environment. But for randoms, it can be useful as well, depending on if you're trying to keep yourself safe by avoiding detection, or if you are trying to aggress the enemy destroyers or enemy front lines. So for instance, if you were playing a Kleb, Kleber wants to go in and just start swinging. We can talk about that a little later with ship types, but this would tell you where the destroyer is. So if you have a good idea that the destroyer doesn't really have backup close, you run it down and kill it. You know where it is, you turn on your engine boost, you charge it, you outspeed it, and then you just beat it down with big guns. Moving on, we have Swift in Silence, which will reduce your main battery reload because you are not trying to take action, you are trying to be swift and silent. But it does increase your ship speed. Again, talking about clan battles in coordinated environments, there's a build for a Kleber, which is a very fast ship, very fast tier 10 French DD, that with Swift in Silence and speed boost and speed flag, whatever, can get up to like 57, 58 knots, which can be extremely useful for positioning around the map. But you're setting yourself up that you don't necessarily want to take a gunfight. So if somebody really does try to push you or force a fight against you, whether it be a DD or a cruiser or whatever, you are less inclined to take that fight because you are literally lessening your offensive capability through guns. Maybe you land torps, which is super cool, and this is actually a great talent for torpedo boats that do not want to take action. They want to slink around, they want to get position, they want to drop torps and slam broadsides and make plays. And then lastly, we have main battery and AA expert. You really don't take this for the flak damage, you take it for the range. The range is going to allow you to apply damage to battleships from safety as opposed to just flinging shells at something and whatever. I tend to find 13.5 to 15 kilometers is really comfortable for working down a battleship, and even if he's shooting you, he's probably not going to hit you. So, oh well. Like, that's one of those moments in a battleship where you're just like, I guess I just die. Because you're not going to be able to dislodge this destroyer that's working on you from 13.5 to 15 kilometers. You might hit him with a random shell or two, but taking 30 seconds between your salvos, do you really want to be taking shots at a DD you're not expecting to hit? This can be very powerful in terms of getting damage or applying pressure to fixed cruiser positions, battleship positions, making plays that way. It doesn't necessarily help you in the close, but it certainly helps you in the medium and the far. All right, so that's going to be all the commander skills. In general, the main 10 is going to be preventative maintenance, last stand, survivability expert, and concealment. And then probably the next 3 points end up going into adrenaline rush. And then you season to taste. You end up going into gunplay, where you can take fearless brawler as well as main battery. Do you try to get the additional fires? Because DDs will be firing HE a lot. Their AP is not necessarily extremely powerful, so it's usable, but it's going to be a niche decision. Or are you going to end up dialing into torpedoes, in which case I would absolutely recommend torpedo speed, because speed deals with reaction time. Reaction time allows people to avoid torpedoes. Less reaction time equals oof. Or are you a consumable destroyer, in which case Superintendent could be the thing for you. You may want to start putting points that way. Superintendent having longer duration on those consumables, having a faster cycling on those consumables, all some fun stuff there. As far as flags go, pretty much you can just pick the, choose for me. But to go through these very quickly, Sierra Mike, more speed. Speed is king on just about any ship that exists in the game. Having more engine power means taking less shells, means avoiding more torpedoes, means getting to where you need to be faster, means getting away from where you need to be away from faster. Sierra Mike, in general, always applicable. Moving on, consumables. Consumables like heals, damage cons, smokes, whatever. You may not really rely on these, but they're always useful. Consumables are powerful in general, so having them, never a bad choice. AA, gonna say this one is, well, I enjoy the AA flag, but for AA enthusiasts, AA enjoyers, but in general, 5% more is 5% more. So in terms of just math, it's more. Hitting flak is not something that you're going to rely on, but continuous is guaranteed. If a plane is close, continuous deals damage to it. It deals a fixed value. Math is math. Moving on, we have the ability to affect smoke. Your smoke generator action time will be a little longer. So that's what that affects. Hydrophone and also defensive fire. If you have that on a DD, this one can affect those. So defensive fire, if you're in, oddly enough, a US DD that packs the defensive fire, it has a little stronger than normal trait to it for the continuous. A Holland would be a good choice for this. But otherwise, you'd probably be taking this for something in hydrophone, like a UK DD or a German DD, something that's going to be packing hydrophone and be able to use that quite a bit. And detonation flag. After that, it comes into, like, this is core. Sorry, I'm starting to get tired, so my mind is wandering. Sierra Mike is core. Detonation is core. These two, you should always run these if you're ever in a competitive environment. Consumables, I would consider as also core. So these three really things you're going to pick. If you're in a competitive environment, damage is great. You probably want to bring additional fire, additional flood chance, which will be these three options. And if you have consumables that you're trying to dial in on, if you have hydrophone, defensive fire, or particularly hydrophone, or smoke, these are going to be signals that will help you. As far as fire and flood damage, again, dots against DDs really don't do a lot of damage. They're not expected to be a severe threat to you. So while these can be useful, meh. A ram flag, not insignificant in clan battle situations. Sometimes you need to use, be the torpedo. Not very often, but sometimes that can happen. This is more, I would say, for cruisers and battleships. And again, we already talked about AA. Secondaries, extremely unlikely you're ever going to use this one. And heal flag, if you have a heal, yes. 20% more healing, always great. Any healing is great. 20% more healing is even greater. So, yay. All right, so that's going to be talking about a bunch of stuff other than dialing into consumables. I'm going to look at chat if anybody has any questions, so I can do that, and then we can move on to some tactical. Basically, how do you play the damn DD? What are the different types? Okay, so why use Kleber HE against a cruiser when you can use AP? Because, let me do this. I had previously enabled paint. Let me see if I can do that again. I do the thing. Boop, there's the paint. I am a paint enjoyer. If you are using a Kleb, oh my god, rawr. There's going to be multiple ways that you're going to interact with the ship. If you are in a Kleb and you're over here, your AP is not going to stick. This is not a line where the AP is going to come in and provide Citadel possibilities. In fact, the AP might just end up bouncing. You might be able to stick it in the superstructure or something, but really at this point, you would just use high explosive. And having the 27 mil pen against, say, a Baltimore, if you were in like a Fontask or whatever, means you can pen the nose, means you can pen the deck, means you can pen the sidewall, means you can pen the back, means you can pen the superstructure. So anywhere you land a hit that's not like Citadel armor level protection on the waterline or a gun is going to be dealing damage and potentially setting fires, which I didn't mention. IFHE also reduces your chance of firing fire. It cuts the base fire chance in half because you're going to be doing more raw pen damage. You're going to have less fire damage on the back end. So it's really about those thresholds. Are you going to be applying more damage or not? If you're going to take IFHE only for it to still shatter anyway, well, then you didn't get any benefit. All you did was nerf your fire chance. No fun. But, of course, if the Kleb or the Fontask or whatever has an angle that it can actually bite in with its AP, then yeah, you could come after this. Those bigger guns really do have Citadel threat against cruisers. But you're going to be using that on an arc, something like this. But there's a lot of times where you're not going to have that arc. The cruiser may not give it to you. You may not. This may be too dangerous of a position for you to be able to take. Could be other enemy ships in the area. Another thing is to remember with the French destroyers is that you could be playing all kinds of far away. You could be like, this could be 15 kilometers distant. And just using HE that's going to consistently pen, thump, 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 you're going to build up damage over time against a target that it's against a fast DD. I mean, other than like trying to hide behind an island or something, it's faster than you. It's more maneuverable than you. It's going to latch onto you like a tick, and it's just going to beat you down with HE shells. Yay. Paint Enjoyer Club. Yeah. We all know the Club and Marceau are best in slot, but why exactly? Why not a more hybrid destroyer like Gearing or Grozavoy? I live and die by my AP. Gdansk Live drives me mad because it can't take advantage of those situations where AP would actually help. Yes, Gdansk line does not have AP, but it has radar. It has fast cycling radar. It has smoke. So it's like you're trading one advantage for other advantages. Having smoke is pretty powerful because you can work on something without being accurately sighted. Having radar is extremely powerful, especially on the Gdansk line where it cycles so quickly. You could use your radar to run a DD off a cap, and then when it comes back into cap, you could run your radar and run it off the cap again before it's able to finish because it cycles so quickly. So you get a unique benefit that others don't have, and you're trading away the AP shells for it. But why are Kleb and Marceau best in slot? So that I can talk about. We're going to go into kind of like the intermediates, or rather gameplay stuff in just a moment, but I was taking some questions from chat for the interim. All right, so Marceau and Kleb, they have a very interesting interaction. So with larger ships, cruisers and whatnot, they have something called saturation. Saturation means this front nose, we're just going to make up a number here. The survivability on the Marceau is basically 22,000 health. This front part might have 2,000 health in it. This rear part may have 2,000 health in it. This middle part's going to have technically an unlimited amount of health, and then superstructure will have an amount of health in it too. So if you're putting shells into this, into the bow of the enemy ship, your damage, some of the damage is going to go into the part itself. Some of the damage is going to go into the ship's entire hull. Just sort of a, I don't want to call it a meme number, but a number that sort of represents hitting the ship anywhere. After you deal a sufficient amount of damage to the nose, where you've depleted that 2,000 health, the 2,000 or the bow becomes saturated, meaning you're not getting that damage anymore with follow-up salvos. So instead of hitting this for say 600 damage per shell, you suddenly start hitting it for only 300 damage per shell because the bow is beat to crap and you're not getting anything else done by hitting it more. You're dealing damage to the entire hull, the theoretical maximum of just the ship itself. French DDs have a special ability where this middle section can saturate out even further than happens on other DDs. So you can take your rather significant health pool, this 22,000, and you can kick on the speed boost and force a fight. Yes, your detection is worse than the enemy DD probably, but you are faster than it. Meaning, if you point your nose at the DD and you charge it, you will run it down, and you will force a fight. And while you're throwing shells at it with your very powerful DPM in the case of the Marceau, or powerful DPM in the case of the Kleb with big guns and a reload booster, and then DPM after, you're going to be able to hit them for significant amounts of damage if you're landing shells in the center, because they don't saturate in the same way that the French DDs will. Whereas French DDs will kind of saturate to an additional level, meaning, you know, that 600 damage per shell, which can go down to 300, that 600 can go down to 300, and then it can go down even further. So this 22,000 health can be more than you think it is, and it can make a low health French DD surprisingly threatening because of adrenaline rush. The closer you are to having 0 health, the more this skill is kicking out additional DPM, and you're probably already built as a gunboat anyway. So yes, having lower health, I mean, the Kleb is under threat. They're that much closer to being taken out of the match, but they're also that much more enraged, almost, to be able to kick out the damage to kill the opponent before they get taken out. And I think I played a Kleb in a ranked match where I was jumped by 2 Shimikazes and I killed them both. And so it's like, you know, your damage feeds me, in a way. So the Marceau has the ability to force fights, have high DPM, and make that work, whereas the Kleb, not so much. Oh, I forgot paint was up. I was like pointing to stuff. I hope you saw it. Anyway, will this be posted on YouTube? I think there's intention to put this stuff on YouTube, but I don't know. I am actually recording this on my end, so I'll put it up on my YouTube just for posterity's sake when I get to it. Is French saturation only in the hull area? Yes, from my testing, it was only in the hull. It was only in the center section. Which is different than in other DDs. So, yes. Let me shrink this a little more. Can I make this a little smaller? I can. Cool. Make that whatever. Or actually, hell, I'll just close it. Thanks, didn't know that. All right, cool. So that seems to be all the questions there. So I'll reopen Paint, and we will talk about some different tactics. All right, so there's going to be, in general, 3 different types of destroyers. You're going to have gunboats, you're going to have torpboats, and you're going to have torpbots, and you're going to have, I'll say, niche or utility. Each of these are going to play different ways. Basically, we're going to use the concept of victory conditions. There might be some people that haven't heard that term. Maybe other people have heard the term, which is super cool. But victory condition, what does that mean? So if you are playing, if your friend is a world-class tennis player, the best thing that they can do if they want to beat you is to play tennis, because they are world-class at playing tennis. You are probably not. So in that case, in just about every chance that you're ever going to play them in tennis, you're going to lose, they're going to win. However, you might be a world-class jump ropist, whatever. And as a result, they might be actually quite athletic, but if it comes down to a jump roping competition, you're probably going to kick the crap out of them over and over and over again. So what are you doing, other than listening to my very strange examples? You are playing to a victory condition. What does your ship do well, such that doing that is going to outperform other ships? So if you are in a gunboat, what does your ship do well? Your ship guns other ships down. Shoots other ships. Shoots other ships better than other stuff. So if you're in a gunboat, for instance, we were talking about a Kleber de Marceau, you're going to be able to take a fight and use the raw power of your guns to overtake the enemy and take them out. Yes, play to its strength, says V Trinity. you're going to do that consistently. You're going to do that almost every time. The only time that you're not going to be able to do that is when you're in a mirror match. When a Kleber is against a Kleber, well, you're even. Or if you have like a prior situation, you've taken half of your ship's health and damage. Maybe you don't want to try to gun down the Shimmer right now because the Shim is full health. So that condition starts to apply. But in general, you want to be looking through the lens of what is your victory condition? How are you going to impose yourself, impose your will upon the battle using the strengths of your ship? For torpedo boats, you're going to have two things. One, you're obviously going to have powerful torpedoes, or torpedoes that do things, or torpedoes that matter, I'll say. Torpedoes that matter, and also stealth. Stealth, speed in general. So why do I say torpedoes that matter? Obviously, torpedoes matter on any ship that they're on because it's a torpedo. If it hits, it's going to hurt. Sure. But those torps might not have the range to really do something. Those torps might not really have the speed to do something. Those torps might not really have the reload to be up often enough to provide consistent threat. So they're there, sure, but they're not something that you're going to lean on as a victory condition. It's a supplement. That's cool. And also, torp boats will tend to have stealth and speed because they need the positioning to be able to enforce their will using torpedoes. Obviously, if you throw torps at something that's bow into you, it's very unlikely they're going to hit. The torpedoes have spread, the enemy might move, and obviously they could just turn into the torpedoes and probably avoid the incoming damage. But if you're able to take a position where you're going to strike in on the broadside of a ship, there's a lot more ship to hit if you're firing from the side as opposed to from the front. So having stealth is going to enable you to take those positions. Having speed is going to enable you to take those positions. And also, theoretically, if somebody calls you on it, you might be able to use your stealth and speed to get back out again, as opposed to just being, well, I got caught. I guess I'm dead. And then you're going to go into niche and utility. So I actually really like the Z52 a lot. And the Z52 falls not really into a gunboat, not really into a torp boat. Why? Because there are other gunboats that are significantly better with their guns that if it comes down to a straight up gunfight, the Z52 loses. It's not that it can't give a good account of itself, not that it can't matter, but if it's stuck in a gunfight with something that has better guns, it loses. And that's a problem. Torps, same thing. If you're in a situation where you're using Z52 torps, it's not that they're bad, it's not that they don't that they're not capable, but it means that if you're trying to make plays, your torps may not be powerful enough, may not be consistent enough to outpace the enemy. So if you had a Shimakaze that's sneaking around on your flank, torping your battleships, and you're on their flank torping their battleships, the Shimakaze that's back on your side might kill your teammates faster than you kill their teammates. That's a recipe for losing. Because their flank may live longer than your flank, which means suddenly you don't have teammates to support you and you probably get wrecked. So the niche utility role is, well, what do you have that you can make matter? Typically, in this case, it's going to be consumables. It's going to be versatility. So the Z52 has Hydro, which can be used to detect stealthy destroyers. It can be used to detect them while smoked, meaning that the Z52, kind of like a spider with a web, is able to catch something in its detection, pop a smoke, and attack it without being able to take much damage in return. So, haha, I've caught you. And then suddenly, the fact that it doesn't have the best guns doesn't stop it from being able to remove the enemy destroyer. The fact that it doesn't have the best torps means that the Hydro can still detect those torps and keep it safe, as well as keep allies safe. So use of its consumable can provide a lot of capability to hold a cap, protect your ships behind you, or enforce your will on something while trying to make sure you're taking a fight on your terms, as opposed to just generally being stronger than everybody else. And then also, it's going to provide versatility. If you're in a ship that is a torp boat that does not have good guns, you cannot be a gunboat. So that means that your victory condition is extremely limited to only this. And if it turns out that the enemy composition that you load into the match with, or maybe as the fight has developed, you've lost certain teammates, they've lost certain teammates, and they have all gunboats, and you have nothing that's really going to stop those gunboats from rushing you. Suddenly, you don't have a way to win those fights. You don't have a way to claim space anymore. So because you can't protect yourself because you are not this, you lose the ability to get the positions that allow you to succeed at this. And vice versa. You may have several enemy Torpboats, but they're too fast, they're too stealthy for you in a gunboat to be able to actually run them down in time. And you've got 2 or even 3 Shimikazes loose running rampant in the back line, murdering all your stuff, and you're not actually able to do anything about it. So being in a situation where you're so extremely this or so extremely this can be a problem for you, whereas something that's more niche or utility may have the versatility. It may have the speed to be able to catch up with something that's stealthy and try to enforce its will on it. It may have enough gun power that it can deal with wounded gunboats, or it has enough gun power that it's able to deal with Torpboats effectively, because yes, Torpboats are going to have guns to be able to defend themselves, but you still have the ability to apply. And another form of utility is going to be in smoke. For instance, the gearing, which I think I might have mentioned before. Gearing has it has rapid reload. It has fast firing guns, but they're just not that punchy. They're just not that great. It has torpedoes that are consistent. They have some pretty good detection and speed to them, but they're just not that punchy. So it can do things, but it doesn't necessarily live in the outlier. It doesn't necessarily live in the extreme where picking it suddenly just you dominate the space. It's more that you have the capability of doing something in a variety of situations. Now it comes down to you making those decisions. There was actually a ship that I had listed up here. I guess I can't necessarily, well, no, I can just boop. That is what I'll do. There was a ship actually which recently got buffed called the Hayate. So the Hayate has the guns of a Shimikaze, which are actually very punchy, but it has a much better reload than the Shimikaze. Shimikaze guns reload at something like 6+ seconds. This reloads at 3.5, which is pretty cool. So you've got these punchy guns with HE damage, 2100 damage per shell, so you can get in there and take a fight. You don't have the gunboat power of a Harugumo though, but you got punchy guns. They're not something to be counted out. You have punchy torpedoes. They hit for 24,000 damage. The detection's not so great, but they're pretty fast. The question came in is with a concealment of 6.1, because I mentioned before, if it's over 6, it starts to get uncomfortable. With a concealment of 6.1, with a maneuverability that's not fabulous, with torpedoes that can be avoided, with guns that aren't necessarily the king of the roost, why would you ever play the ship? Well, realistically, the reason why you play the ship is because of the niche utility, meaning versatility. So versatility being your strength, you can adapt to situations more. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that players enjoy playing a ship that's like a jack of all trades. If you're 80% of this and 80% of that and 80% of something else, you're never 100% of something. And inevitably, when you come into a situation where you're fighting something that is 100% of that something, you lose. And there are a lot of people that get very frustrated by that. Fortunately, the Hayate was buffed and got a torpedo reload booster, which people felt was enough of an extra oomph that it kind of turned it into its own 100% of itself. So, me personally, I actually really enjoy niche and utility ships because I enjoy the versatility. I'm a big fan of the decision-making aspects of World of Warships and how that can really put you in, a lot of situations of how can I deal with this, what can I do? And I find that if you pick a ship that is only a Torpboat, that is only a gunboat, you may be in a situation where you're just like, well, I'm so highly specialized, I don't have a tool to deal with this. And that's rough. But it can happen. That's one of the interesting parts about the game, because we have attritional warfare. You will lose teammates over time, lose capabilities over time, and you're stuck trying to figure out what can you make happen in the interim. But just something else before I move on from this. This is actually something that is extremely relevant in like clan battle theory. So when you're looking at competitive, if you're trying to fill a slot, you're trying to fill a destroyer slot, you are going to have an extreme reason as to why you're picking something. Harugumo, for instance, is actually a niche/utility. that has excellent guns, but people bring it because of a smoke and they're going to pair it up with somebody. So effectively, when you're playing competitive, you try to pick something that is the best for what it's supposed to do. You pick the best Torpboat because you wanted a Torpboat. You pick the best gunboat, and you're going to make sure that you're putting that ship in positions where it's going to be a gunboat. Things of that nature. You'll find that in competitive, because everything is so hyper optimized, so min-maxed, people tend not to want jack of all trade ships because they cannot be optimized by nature. Their power lies in their ability to deal with multiple types of situations, although maybe suboptimally. Okay, so let's talk about map stuff. But I guess before I do that, I will ask once again if anybody has questions, in which case I can do the thing. Is Kida the best in that line? I see the comment so frequently versus the Haragumo. Is Kitakaze the best in the line? Haragumo is honestly great. Haragumo is very powerful. It has a unique upgrade which can make its smoke even more powerful. It extends the duration and such. Like it makes the smoke rival or even better than US smoke. And not only could it theoretically use the smoke for itself, it could use the smoke for a cruiser or two. And when you're a destroyer, if you have a cruiser in your back pocket, you're probably winning any fight that you have against an enemy DD. Unless they have a cruiser in their back pocket. Haru's worst concealment and turning circle is a big deal for you. Yes, the Haragumo is a sluggish boat. Okay. Which is a, I guess, worse maneuvering destroyer, Elbing or the Kitakami? Well, Kitakami is a cruiser, so she doesn't qualify as a destroyer. Elbing in general is less sluggish than she used to be because of a unique upgrade that gives her more engine power. But really, if you're playing Elbing as though she's a light cruiser with no citadel. You're playing her to be able to apply extremely accurate shots at range. Okay, so let's talk about... You didn't realize this would be on so late tonight? Well, I do talk a lot. That's one of the things that I'm known for. And I will ask before I go on to the next thing, if you've been here for however the hell long this has been, I guess a little over an hour and a half now, have you been enjoying it? Have you picked up any information? Thumbs up, thumbs down, let me know in the chat. I do try to ask what people think as we go along. Super helpful? Woot. Okay, so moving on. In terms of how do you play the destroyer? So again, this is intro to DD. So okay, we've talked about upgrades, we've talked about commander skills, we've talked about consumables to an extent, but we've even talked about gunboats, torpboats, and utility. How are you going to play these? So let me go over here and put these back. Gunboat, torpboat, and utility. And maybe I'll assign a color to them is what I'll do. So gunboat I'll put in green. Torpboat I'll put in purple. And utility I'll put in orange. Okay, so looking at a standard map, you have to think of where is stuff going to operate in? You know, where are you expected to be and why? What are you going to be doing there? So if you were a gunboat, your detection may not be the best. You're going to be playing in two different ranges for two different reasons. One is you're going to be playing in a frontline position. Why? Because as a frontline position, a Marceau, a Kleber, something of that nature, you would be expected to interact with the enemy destroyers and potentially kill them. And remember, not everybody is going to play optimally. Not everybody is going to have perfect play. So there could be a utility ship that flies too close to the sun, gets spotted by you, even in a gunboat with maybe worse detection, and it gets dead. So just because perfect play might say that if you're positioned here, you'll never actually interact with whatever ship, people screw up all the time. The only issues are with the way the room does sound. It's very loud. You can't interact with that. So if you click on the, if you click on me up here, you should be able to alter my volume. At least I believe you should. So, all right. So if we continue with this, yeah, right click for volume slider. So frontline position, you're going to be using gunboats for that. You're also going to be using gunboats potentially in the midline positions. Why the midline positions? Because depending on the gunboat that you're running, you might actually be using this as a bit of a siege weapon. And in which case you're going to be looking more to do flank stuff. So if you were running a Kleber or an Elbing and you had something like 15 kilometers range, you're able to reach into the enemy midline from your midline. You don't have to be on the front for that. You can be in the mid. You will need somebody to spot your target for you, but you can absolutely apply damage because destroyers already have excellent dispersion. They have the ability to have a much tighter shell grouping than a cruiser, for instance. So you might not have as good of a ballistic pattern because the cruisers will have bigger shells, so maybe their flight time will be a little more comfortable for them. But if you're a skilled gunner, you're able to work from a midline position and still exude threat, not only on the enemy front line if they're spotted, maybe by a different DD or by radar or by planes, but also work on cruisers in the back as well. And remember, you are a small target. You are a small maneuverable target, unless you're in a Haragumo, which means that if people do take shots at you, you can move around fairly successfully and bait and juke shells. So a gunboat is ideally, I don't want to say always be firing, but probably 80% of the time, you're going to be shooting. Or you should be setting yourself up to be shooting. So there are some videos, for instance, where I don't remember what content creator it was. It may have been Flamu or Flambass or something. I remember this from many years ago, where they were in a destroyer, a Daring. Daring has short burst smokes. So a Daring is a gunboat. She's a brawler. She wants to get in close. Her detection's not great. Her speed's not great, but she has a heal. So she can get lit, get into a scrap, heal back up, go back in, get into a scrap again, do whatever she needs to do. So you've got a Daring who's probably sharking around in this front area here. Able to protect and watch the side. So has proximity in case there's a destroyer that's trying to sneak through. And obviously is able to do some cap contesting or potentially just get eyes on the enemy targets from an advanced position. But one of the things that Daring is going to have is that if a battleship starts to push or a cruiser starts to push, somebody flies a little too close to the sun, they can just go ahead and pop a smoke. I'll use something a little darker. They go ahead and pop a smoke, which is only going to last for like 40 seconds, 50 seconds, whatever, and just start laying into it with their guns. They might not do a ton of damage in the sense that their guns may not pen very well because they're smaller destroyer guns, but they could light fires. They could light multiple fires. So you can pop a smoke, light off in a Daring, and quickly amass 30, 40, 60,000 damage over the course of your smoke and back up. And as these enemies are pushing, it's more likely that they are detected by the enemy or by your friendly midline as opposed to only you in the front line. So as they get more aggressive, you have the ability to interact with them, you pop smoke, you dump damage into them, and you back up if you need to. Or maybe they back up and you can hold position, whatever. And of course, if an enemy destroyer strays a little too close to the sun, you could try to take that engagement directly. Something that I will point out, though, for this front line is your front line needs to be cognizant of their front line. Actually, no, I'm just going to go back and clear this up a little bit. So your front line needs to be cognizant of their front line and also their midline. So here we have midline positions again. And there could also be islands or something that people are using, whatever. So if a destroyer does wander on up looking to do the cap, if you start, okay, cool, now is my time. I'm going to work on this. If there happens to be a cruiser or a battleship or something in this midline area, typically that means that it's close enough to directly apply damage to you. Now, if you were back here, those shells might whiff. The difference, this might be a 6-second lead time shot, this might be a 10-second lead time shot, and the difference of those 4 seconds can be pretty massive in terms of whether you actually get hit or not, because you're in a destroyer, you can maneuver. So when you start having stuff that's closer, it's not just the enemy that might be attacking you, it's all of their friends. And you have to factor that in. So don't just expect that because you're in a gunboat position or that you're guarding something that you need to be the person that is actively defending it. It could also be that just being here is enough to gut check the enemy into playing safely. They end up playing back here because you're playing up here. They're giving space because they don't think they can tangle with you. So having this position, claiming this position, very important. I'm going to go ahead and say utility can be very similar. Utility can also play the frontline position here as well. It doesn't really have this midline position as much, although, of course, if you happen across a utility ship like maybe the Z-52, where the ballistics are pretty okay, you can extend that out to a decent range, you might be able to take some further back slots, but I would actually put this maybe here, kind of between frontline and midline. You're not necessarily a frontline fighter, but as a utility DD, you might have radar, and that radar allows you to project threat against this area. You may have smoke, which means you want this forward position so you can smoke your assets behind. There's a big aspect of World of Warships which is called trading. So if you have an enemy ship here and a friendly ship here, and they're shooting at each other one for one, theoretically, by the time your friend has dealt 50% damage to him, he's dealt 50% damage to your friend. If you end up dropping smoke to block them out, well, now they're dealing damage to him, and he's not dealing any damage in response, or he's dealing very little. So suddenly you have 50% of an enemy that's gone while he's only taken 5% damage to him because people blind fire. That trade means that eventually this cruiser has to leave. He can't withstand this situation. He has to back up, go dark, do whatever he can do because he's losing the trade so badly he cannot continue to take that. You as a destroyer have the ability to affect this space, this area, so that you can affect those trades through uses of your consumables. You can use radar to detect previously undetected things that might be spotting or attacking your ships. You can use smoke to protect assets. And of course, all of this stuff is fluid because the game is all about decision making. Utility can, to an extent, hold some of these side areas. They can be used to push. Gunboats can do this as well, but a gunboat is going to, by the very nature of being a gunboat, light itself up when it's using its guns. If you're, however, using a Z-52, you could exploratorily push these areas to try to get torp angles so that you can torp in with those, or present some kind of backline threat using whatever weird capabilities you might have. Essentially, jack of all trade, master of none. You're not necessarily just a gunboat. You could also be a bit of a torp boat, like a Hayate. Hayate would be able to slip in and start throwing torps, get the angles, and potentially deal some really powerful damage that way, which could be great. And then you have torpboats. Torpboats, I'm just going to put a line here. They have a very basic interaction with being in a front line, because in general, they are not expected to hold a front line. If an enemy gunboat gets an advantage, if there is destroyer possibilities, they could simply be shoved off, in which case they're not actually holding the map position. They're providing some, sure, they might be providing information, but they're not holding it. So the real question comes in for torpboats is how are they going to be able to take flanks and threaten flanks? How are they going to be able to make unsuspecting pushes? And in a way, torpedo destroyers are similar to submarines, the difference being that submarines can reduce their detection even further by going to a deeper depth. But one of the first things you might see with a Shimakaze is that they're going to go hump the border all the way down to something like this, and they're going to throw torps into the battleships in the backline. And if those torps are not expected, they may just dev strike battleships right off the field. And then suddenly, if there are no battleships in this position, the flank can't hold, which means they can continue to shark around, and they can throw more torps, and they can continue to shark around, and they can throw more torps. They have a lot of presence, but they need to find positions that they're attacking broadside angles. You really wouldn't want to see, there's almost no utility in a torp boat at mid. There's almost no utility of a torp boat in the back because they're not going to be able to do anything. They're not going to be able to torp anything. They absolutely can play between their friendly ships, their medium ship or midline ships, their backline ships, but really they're looking to take aggressive position. And it's on the team to provide them the ability to do that. Although please don't take that as an excuse for a Shimakaze to just YOLO in and be like, why did my team do this? Whatever. Like, don't be a dip. But while a gunboat, the first thing it might do is go to the cap, either to take the cap or just to kind of hold this area. If it's not close enough to watch the sideline, it could absolutely have a torpedo boat slip through and then start slamming into its rear assets. In which case, now the Torpboat has a problem. Does it provide frontline presence for its team, or does it leave the front line to try to chase down a torpedo boat, which may be faster and stealthier than it is? So it can mirror, again, a bit of submarine play in that sense. Torpedo boats can be extremely disruptive to enemy positions and enemy play, but they need to be finding ways to throw their torps. So let's try to look at where are optimal torpedo positions. Now, islands can, of course, screw this up. If there is an island here, for instance, you're not going to be able to torp an enemy ship from that side. That's just not an option that you're going to have if this is a position that they chose to take. You might also not be able to push this flank because of that same island where somebody takes a position here using the island for cover. It's too close for you to be able to get in to torp from the side. Maybe the detection range actually blocks you all the way back here. These things are certainly going to factor into your play, but ideally, there is a threat center point of the map where this is an arbitrary threat here, center point. Why? Because of midline and backline. Basically, battleships. Heavy caliber guns are going to be back here doing heavy caliber gun things. So if you have this abstracted threat point, it means that the enemy battleships will probably be lined to this abstracted threat point. They could be bow out, they could be bow in, but it means that if a battleship is firing from over here, it's angled, it's not going to get wrecked. If a battleship is firing from here, it's angled, it's not going to get wrecked. So where is your ideal torp angle as a torpedo destroyer? Your ideal torp angle is going to be something on this window. You may not have to push all the way down to be able to dev strike this. You might just be looking for, do I have battleships in the back line? Is this person angling to the battleships in the back line? In which case I go after it. You're probably not going to see a battleship do something like this, because while this is angled to the two battleships on the flank, it's not angled to battleships that choose to take long-range fire. And while not every battleship will actually take this shot, because that's going to be an extreme distance in terms of lead time, 16, 20, 25 seconds depending. If one of these is a Vermont and they're a capable player, if they see this, they're going to go after it. So battleship players in general are going to be taking positions which are dealing with the threat center or a more localized threat center on the flank that they're on, assuming that the other battleships are so far away that they don't have to worry about it. So normally you're going to be seeing something like this. This will be your average alignment, unless somebody's gamer turning or they're just trying to run away or something. Usually you'll see something like that, or you might see something like this. But something like this, where it's just straight up and down, is less effective because you're not really getting your back guns engaged. And in general, players want to use all their guns at all times. So usually you're going to be expecting something like that, which again means potential torp angle coming in from here. So just to review, as far as gunboats go, gunboats are going to be operating in the front line because they can. They can find an enemy thing, they can shoot it in the face, they can kill it that way. So front line, absolutely a thing. They'll be able to provide spotting, they'll be able to provide map control, they'll be able to make it happen. And depending on the range of the gun threat that they have, they could play further back or play from weird angles in order to be able to shell island-based positions or shell the midline of the enemy that is lit, like cruisers and such. Just because it's a cruiser doesn't mean you can't take shots at it. Moving over to torpboats, torpboats are going to be about trying to claim flanks. Why? Because flanks are what's going to offer you opportunities to torp the enemy. And if you slam a few torpedoes home with a Shimakaze or many torpedoes from a Holland, because individually they don't do very much, but they have a really small firing arc and they're very fast, so they're very landable. If you're able to get torpedo damage in, you're not weathering down an enemy by slow attritional trades. You are dealing massive strikes to an enemy that's causing them to have to immediately reassess what is going on in this flank. Wow, we just lost half of our battleship. Can we hold this? Oh crap, we can't. They're starting to charge us. I guess we have to run. Like, things like that can radically alter your ability to, hold a position. So if a torpedo boat can slide into an unexpected, place, that can be pretty bad. And you have utility, which can play any of these positions to an extent. You're probably not going to be playing that midline like a gunboat would because your guns are probably just not that capable. But you could still play behind the front line. You could assist a gunboat. You could assist other ships that are trying to do frontline presence. You could assist a torpedo boat, so that a shimakaze that's going, you could be able to bring some kind of radar that's going on or some kind of gun threat so that it's not just an isolated destroyer. And if it ends up pulling attention from a gunboat or pulling attention from something else, the two of you may be able to overwhelm that threat. Okay, so talking about all of this, I think that's going to be talking about kind of like placement and conceptual theory of how you would be expecting to use this. So I will again ask, was this something that was useful to you? Did you think it was cool? If so, please let me know in the comments, and I will take questions if anybody has any. Very helpful, says Nate the Cat. As someone who will look at the minimap every minute or so, playing destroyers can be interesting. You're trying to improve how often you look at the minimap. Well, that's cool. Yeehaw. It's very helpful to do so. In general, staring at the ass of a ship doesn't really give you I mean, the ships in the game are very pretty, but one of the things when I was a carrier player growing up, looking at the tail end of a plane for 40 seconds while flying from point A to point B, it gets old. So I would start looking at the map while I was not doing something else. So if I was in this position as a gunboat, and I'm not actively shooting somebody, I'm just kind of in a holding pattern. I'm providing spotting. I'm providing presence. I'm looking, I'm not just staring at the water. I'm going to be looking at the minimap and seeing what's going on. The only time I'm going to be pulled onto the main section of the screen is when, there's an active fight going on, or I need additional information to assess the situation that's not just going to be provided by a minimap. Very useful. You'd love more of this. Yeehaw. Okay, did I have anything else prepared? I didn't actually prepare this. This is really off the cuff. So again, my apologies for the rambly-ish nature of this. But a lot of times when it comes to just getting information, it just helps me to have questions. Somebody asks me a question, I answer the question. And it just kind of builds up. Good job just winging it? Yeah. I mean, I've lived this stuff for several years, so it's what I got. Well, if there are any questions in chat, I will answer questions. Otherwise, I've gone for almost 2 hours, so I will be closing it down. So you got like 5 minutes Q&A. If you have any specific questions you'd like to ask, I can dial into hyper specifics about ships or modes or something like that. We can really dive deep with it if you want. Otherwise, I'll be hitting that dusty trail. You appreciate the rambling. It contains pearls of wisdom. Thank you for sharing your experience. Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. What of the 3 categories do we put Grozovoy? And is Delny good at anything at all? So Grozovoy would be a utility ship. Grozovoy has a heal, has smoke, has capable guns. Grozovoy is almost a gunboat. Almost a gunboat. But there are other boats that are better at gunnery than the Grozovoy. So Grozovoy having, smoke and having accurate, good ballistics means it can steadily apply damage, but also has other things. It also has technically AA. It has a heal. It has other, opportunities for it. So I would almost put it in the utility, not necessarily because it can't be a good gunboat, but because it doesn't shine as a gunboat to the extreme such that it's not capable at other things. So I would put it under utility as kind of rounded. And then what was the other one? Is the Delny useful at all? Sure. So the Russian DDs have an extreme amount of engine power and generally good ballistics. So you would want to play a Russian DD with, let me go ahead and bop the paint. Oop, there we go. You would want to play Russian DD, making sure that you are using this skill, main battery and AA expert. I think I have. Do you have a Delny readied up? I may not. Okay, so yeah, with the Delny, I'm running main battery, and if we look at the artillery, it's already 13.1, which means just putting a commander on it that's going to increase its range increases it out to 15.8. Very hard to hit. Not only that, it has some spicy armor at 50 millimeters, so if it does happen to take a fight, one thing you have to remember with the Russian DDs, their DPM is not great, but the damage is very applicable. So if you're able to use the speed at a long range, you can continuously, kind of like on that paint where I was showing the midline position, you can continuously apply damage, apply fires to cruisers. You can continuously apply damage, apply fires to battleships. And you have the speed to juke incoming shells. So also, if you're pulling fire onto you and off of your allies, that is just as effective as providing a smokescreen where your friendly ships are not able to be hit, because they're firing at you and they're not able to hit you. So it's partially about what you're able to provide. And one of the things that I would do when I played Russian DD is I would drop a shell, drop a shell. I would shoot the water right next to my ship on accident to flare out my detection to this wider amount, because when people see DDs, they go, oh, it's a destroyer, I should shoot it. And then suddenly a cruiser that may not have wanted to break stealth quite that early fires. Or a DD that thinks, well, I could probably hit him at this range, shoots. And you start having enemy targets voluntarily light themselves, or battleships or something, where you as a destroyer, you don't have the detection to be able to play the front line because you'll be out detected very easily. But you do have the ability to bait and pull fire onto yourself pretty effectively. The guns on the Delny are a little less comfortable, I think, than the Khabarovsk. I really enjoy playing the Khabarovsk. But she's still capable. I think her win rate's probably not exceptional, though. So maybe someday her guns will be a little more comfy. That'd be pretty cool. You suck at French DDs. One tip you would suggest to suck less. Unironically, don't take Concealment Expert. This was something that I actually used in Russian destroyers. Russian destroyers do not want to fight enemy DDs because enemy DDs will tend to have better DPM than the Russian destroyers. So if it comes down to a 6-7 kilometer slugging match, the enemy destroyer, just by the fact that they're closer to you, they're probably actually able to hit you with their shells, which means they could take you out, and that would suck. So having worse detection, you get detected sooner, which means you tend to play back further away. You tend to force yourself to play more of a midline position as opposed to playing a frontline position because you're actively under threat all the time. So suddenly, when you're not playing at seven clicks away from a DD, you're playing at 8, you're playing at 9, you have a lot of speed, which means you are hard to hit. Not only that, you're in a French destroyer, so you also have the saturation effect. And also, you're in a French destroyer. If you're in a Kleb, your ballistics are probably better than the ballistics of the enemy that's firing at you. So in that case, you're in a DD, your dispersion is great. You're in a Kleb, your ballistics are great. You're probably able to apply better damage to them than they are to you. So unironically, you may want to not put the 4 points into Concealment Expert for your commander. I don't know if you would necessarily change from Concealment Expert in slot 5. I don't really think there's anything else that screams, please pick me. But if you pull it out of the commander, you could put it somewhere else. Like you could put it into the 10% additional DPS when detected, because you'll be detected all the time. Or you could put it into something else where you can get additional like fire chance or something, whatever. The Holy Google Doc says to take Concealment Expert on Kleber. Do we ignore that? So every player is going to have their understanding life cycle. Nobody is amazing right out the bat. I used to work at Domino's Pizza a long time ago. So I went from not knowing how to make a pizza to knowing how to put toppings correctly on a pizza to knowing how to spread out the dough for the pizza and sauce it and whatever, and eventually getting to a point where I could solo deal with a rush where, 40 people call within an hour. I can make all the pizzas, put them in the oven, cut them, do all the stuff, whatever. The more you interact with an experience, the more you learn about it, and the more you can make the judgment calls on how to do something. You'll know where you can get away with this and you can't get away with that. So if you're a person that has never played the ship before, the Holy Google document may suggest Concealment Expert, because Concealment Expert, the less you're detected, the less likely you're dead. Unfortunately, in a Kleber or Russian DD, the closer you are to an enemy ship, the easier you are to hit. So it's a little bit counterintuitive, you might say. But still, if you're not detected, people aren't shooting at you, you're probably not dead. So as a new player, sure, it's a great choice to make. As a more experienced player, you've learned what you do. You've learned how you use the ship, how the ship works for you, what you can do in it, what you can't do in it. That's when you can start to move the points around in your commander build to really tailor into something that you're trying to do specifically. So I mentioned earlier, like the first 10 points in a commander for a destroyer are going to be these. You're going to get preventative maintenance, you're going to get last stand, you're going to get survivability expert, you're going to get concealment. As you become more capable, so like maybe a Shimikaze, here's a controversial hot take. You could play a Shima without survivability expert. If you're playing a Shimikaze in a way that you feel extremely in control of your own detection, extremely in control of what you are trying to do and how you are able to do it, you are picking a Torpboat, and that Torpboat is a bit of an outlier. So if you're in a situation where Torpboats just really suck, you might not be able to do much. But if you're in a position where you can make plays in a Torpboat and you have the expertise to be able to do it, you may not need to take survivability expert, as long as you don't take the additional 3,500 damage and health that you would have had from survivability expert. You know, instead of taking 20,000 damage, you take 17. That's the difference between life and death. So it's up to you to make that play. But until you feel like you're at an expertise level where you can make that decision, probably easier to just pick the standard shit and play it out as normal. So yeah. Play Jaeger without SE, can't shoot what you can't see. Sure, like it's just, it really comes down to how you are playing. Would you say it's the same for ranked as it is for randoms? French DDs with no detection. Sure. Your French destroyer still has the ability to force fights. The big thing about the French destroyer is you have so much speed, you can run down any enemy. So the enemy cannot get away from you. They can smoke, and you can run them down anyway. They can run away to teammates, and you can run them down anyway. You may be dead for it, because the teammates will shoot you too, but you have the ability to force plays. And if you have the health, and you have the saturation, as long as you see a play that you're willing to force, you can do that. Obviously, you can also do the wrong thing, and you can throw your ship away. So, I mean, don't just assume that you're God mode. But in ranked, you're going to have situations where maybe you don't hard push for the first minute or few until you find, okay, this is my time. Then you go for it. You get the kill. You get out. Because you have the speed to get into a firefight. You also have the speed to get out of it. But it's going to be about picking your time windows. Best I could say is if you're ever having questions about how to play, how do I approach this situation? Look at a replay. Show a replay to a friend. Show a replay to somebody on this Discord. There's a Ranked Frustrations channel where people play ranked all day. They'd probably be more than happy to criticize or offer suggestions. And that's how you learn. It's just figuring stuff out. Double rudder never fails, really funny and effective. Again, I would say that comes down to making an intentional choice. Double rudder for like the Khabarovsk, for instance, might be a thing because the rudder is terrible on that ship. But if you have a double rudder, you also don't have prop mod, which means if your engine ever gets knocked out, suddenly you're really sluggish. And your engine is such a core feature of what the ship is, that's pretty tough. Okay. Concealment expert on Kleb works well with legendary mod? Sure. I mean, that's dialing in on a specific build. The legendary or unique mod for the Kleber gives even more detection. I think it takes it down to like 6.1-ish, 6.2, something like that. So the very fast, very hard-hitting torpedoes of the Kleber turns it into a Torpboat. You literally give up gun power to become a stealthier, speedy, sneaky DD with great torps. Some gunboats don't have enough DD to outrange a Schlieffen's reign of secondaries. Is there a way around that? No, not in all cases. So like the Gearing, for instance, Gearing has American guns, which can be pretty damn floaty. So they go out to 13-1. If you took the commander skill and you added 20% to it, it would go out further, go out over 13. So technically you could outrange a Schlieffen in that sense, but the amount of lead time you would have to give to the guns is pretty painful. It's quite uncomfortable. So really it's just not something that you're going to do. In that case, if you had to interact with the Schlieffen, you would smoke or fire over an island, or don't interact with the Schlieffen because the Schlieffen's probably going to kick your ass. You know, there is that. That channel exists to gripe, not to offer assistance. I wouldn't necessarily look at it that way. There are a lot of people that are very passionate about it, so they will be able to give you some information. But if you're putting stuff in there and you're really just not getting good information, I mean, you can put the replay in there and you can tag me and I can take a look at it, stuff like that. You send rainbow guns, sure. Mogador was kind of rough to grind through because there were at least 2 different Schlieffens on each team and you had like no range. Ooh, so Mogador. No, then you may have had a commander that didn't have very many skill points, but Mogador has range just fine. So let's actually look at this real quick. So we'll look at the Mogador, and something that allows me to see it. Come on, rawr, you can do the thing. I have tons of doubloons because folks that are employees as a perk get 500 doubloons a day. So if you're like, what the hell? It's built up. So if we look at the Mogador, Mogador has a base range of 12.8, which already is further than the Schlieffen secondaries. I think the Schlieffen secondaries are 12.2, or sorry, 12.6. So first off, even at a basic level, you outrange the Schlieffen. But if you bring in a commander that is taking, and you should, main battery and AA expert to get an additional 20% firing range, goes out to 15.3. The biggest issue you're going to have with Schlieffen is not outranging it, it's going to be detecting it. Because by the time you've detected a Schlieffen, you're probably in secondary range. So ideally, somebody else is detecting it for you. If you're playing a Mogador, you're not... let me think about how to say this, because I don't want it to be confusing. Mogador is a gunboat, so you can play it forward-facing. Notice, in this build, I don't have Concealment Expert, so my detection is 8.3. So if I go to that front line and there's an enemy destroyer that has 6 kilometer detection, he's detecting me 2.3 kilometers before I detect him, which means I'm playing dances with shells, where I'm avoiding cruiser shells, I'm avoiding battleship shells, whatever. So that's okay. I'm fine playing dances with shells because I'm in a Mogador, but in terms of like, if I take that frontline position, I'm not necessarily killing the DD if the DD has backup. So why am I taking the frontline position? Why not take a midline position where I can fire from 15 kilometers away and work on cruisers, work on battleships, etc. Now that also means that because I'm not in a frontline position, a Schlieffen that decides not to shoot his guns could just hard shove. And then suddenly, surprise, they're within 12 kilometers of your team and their secondaries are firing and he's doing crazy Schlieffen stuff. Schlieffen has a weakness in the sense that it's not as well armored as traditional battleships. It has an overmatchable nose. In general, it's just not as well armored as traditional battleships. So focus fire can bring it down. But if a Schlieffen waits until, midway into a match where ships have taken damage, stuff's kind of beat up, and it still has the majority of its health, it can slam into an enemy line like a hammer or a battering ram, and just, it's slamming in with torps and guns and secondaries and health, and just, it can absolutely shatter a formation just by hitting W. That is a thing you have to be aware of. And maybe in your Mogador, you have very powerful torpedoes, 18.4. You have a lot of speed. I am speed. So if a Schlieffen decides to hard YOLO you, you may actually hard YOLO it back and come in here and slam it with, potentially 5 or something, torps dealing 18,000 times 5. You'll probably, I don't think you would alpha a Schlieffen off the field, but you could certainly rip it in half, or maybe even better. And you plus your teammates plus your guns firing once you're spotted, because why not shoot if you're spotted anyway? You can just do something off of that. It really comes down to what you're trying to do. But one of the things that the French do actually have is, because of their extreme amounts of speed and the resiliency of their hull, as long as they have enough health, they can YOLO somebody that shoves into them. Mogador has enough range eventually, but not stock. Okay, well, even if you're using stock, if you have a commander that you're promoting up the line when you're grinding stuff, go from tier 4 to tier 5 to tier 6 to tier 7, you want this skill. If you are playing a French ship, you want this skill. Maybe in the lower tiers you don't. Maybe in the lower tiers you prioritize firing range. So for instance, if you're playing, I think it's the Jaguar. Is that right? Jaguar is a tech tree ship, or is that a premium? Yeah, Jaguar, the Gepard, something like this. Jaguar has a surprising amount of detection to it, or a surprisingly low detection, if I recall. Yeah, you get down to like 6.3 on this. So you can get close and you can start just dumping into the enemy. If you go up a rank, I think you have main battery reload at that point. You do. You have the main battery reload booster. Your detection is worse, but you can still force fights. You may have... the guns may... Sorry, I'm trying to phrase this correctly. The ballistics get good at tier 8. So you probably are not taking the extended range prior to tier 8. But once you are a tier 8 and up, you want the extended range. There's almost no reason not to take it. Unless you were playing a Kleb that's, you know, Lego Kleb and you're just not going to use your guns at all. You could not take it because you just want to try to assassinate DDs. That's a possibility. You could do that. But the guns on the French line are so good that probably the first half of a match, you're not YOLOing anything. You're just throwing in damage and consistently chipping stuff down so that you can attrition down a flank, and then you can start forcefully, aggressively taking positions and making plays. You can use AP on the squishy sleeping nose. You could do that. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to go ahead and call it there. I hope you guys had some fun. Once again, if you haven't put anything in the chat, one of the things that we do with these stages is we record feedback. You know, did people like it? Was it fun? So I do literally put screenshots of what people said in the chat into the like post-action review. So this is sort of your way to rate the stage experience. Did you like it? Did you not? Was it boring? Did I talk too much? The guy's voice was too deep, like whatever, you know, throw it in the chat. We can do the thing. Can we call the series Ask Cants or Ask Ants? So I usually say like a sconce, like, oh, look, that lighting fixture. What do you call that? Oh, that's a sconce. Although technically if you, I think, use the British word, which does not have an A, it's to look askance of something, which is like looking away at mild disapproval or something. This was great, 10 out of 10. Thank you, very good info, not boring at all, too helpful. A sconce is a ceiling fixture. Oh, I thought it was a wall fixture. I could be wrong. Oh well. But that's how I say it. I say it as a sconce. But yes, I had also thought about making a thread which was ask a sconce. But then technically the ask and the asconce are different, and it would just promote wrong pronunciation, whatever. Okay. All right, well, that's going to be it for me, so I hope you all have a lovely day.